The night the empire chose its path, the palace burned with ceremonial light. Rivers of molten glass ran beneath the crystal floor, humming like a heartbeat the size of a world. Heralds walked in silence, and the thousand banners of conquered. Suns hung without a ripple, as if even air itself held its breath. At the center of that arrested universe waited Queen Kaelira, tall, still, a figure carved from winter in flame. Servants brought the relic from the vault in a vessel of living stone. Even inside the sealed cradle, she could feel it, a pulse that wasn't hers, an old, hot breath that smelled of ash and oaths. The crown of flames. Her mother once told her it was not worn so much as accepted, and not accepted so much as endured. Tonight, tradition demanded that endurance become destiny. The court gathered like a ring of knives. Warlords in armor, veined with gold. Ministers whose voices could cut more cleanly than steel. Beyond the balcony, the city of Ve bristled with spears of light. Fleets climbed into the sky in unreadable formations, waiting for the one command her mouth alone could give. The border clash thousands, dead on both sides, had swollen into grief and fury. The empire wanted blood, and the crown whispered. It would be righteous. Kaelira had always measured herself against duty. Since childhood, the throne had been a horizon that never moved closer, no matter how many steps she took. When they placed the cradle before her, and the living stone unfurled like a flower, she did not step back. She lifted the crown, and it woke in her hands, warm, almost tender, as a serpent might be tender to the sunlight. The coronation chamber dimmed. The heat bit her palms. She lowered it onto her brow, and the world slipped. Not a way down, as if she fell through a shaft of memory into other lives worn smooth by use. She heard voices, layered and braided, ancestors who had ruled with iron and mercy in alternating seasons, who had conquered continents and broken revolts, who had looked at stars as if they were pieces on a board they could rearrange. Their counsel poured through her like smoke. Blood, they breathed. War clarifies. War keeps them in line. War remembers for us when we are tired. She braced her spine and let the chorus settle inside her. Her breath came thin. The room returned grain by grain. The banners, the glass, the watching faces. A small part of her wanted to lean forward and ask, softly, could I not be only a woman, just tonight? Could I not be Kaelira instead of your vessel? But queens do not ask such things where knives can hear. A captain stepped forward and bowed to the floor. We have taken human prisoners, he said, voice respectful, eyes hungry. Their testimonies will please you. There was a polite ripple of laughter, the kind that meant no laughter at all. Kaelira nodded. The doors opened. They brought them in. 3 men, 1 woman, all in chain bands that adjusted to their heat. The humans were smaller in frame, but there was a stubbornness to the line of their shoulders that reminded her of river. Stones, simple, yes, and impossibly hard to move. 2 bowed quickly. 1 looked around as if memorizing the room, and the last he stood as if the chains were only decoration someone had asked him to try on for a moment. Name, a minister, demanded Elias Ward, he answered. His voice was rough, like he had been breathing dust for days. Her court expected a performance, please. Accusations, curses. Instead, the man lifted his chin, not arrogant, not resigned, simply unworried by the pressure of their gaze. He should have looked down. He did not. He looked at her. In that instant, the crown's whispers surged. They pressed against her skull like storm water. Say the word, they urged, and we will settle over your people like a shield and a scythe. Say the word, and the fleets will bloom. Say the word, and grief will harden into justice. Her pulse matched the old rhythm, and for a breath, she was her grandmother, her great-grandfather, 100 faces talking through hers. She was also, unhelpfully, Kaelira, the girl who had once snuck out to walk the poor quarter and learned the names of the women who mended ships with their hands. She should have seen only an enemy. Instead, she noticed the tired humor at the corner of Elias Ward's mouth, the light nick on his cheek that hadn't yet scabbed, the way his fingers flexed as if fighting the urge to reach for something that wasn't there. She noticed the steadiness of his gaze, and there beneath, steady, she recognized a quiet grief that matched her own. The recognition startled her. The crown pulsed in warning, hot, disapproving. The minister repeated the demand for deference. The two prisoners who had bowed dropped lower until their foreheads nearly touched the floor. Elias did not kneel. The chains creaked as he shifted his weight, but he remained upright, and the small unyielding of it sent a ripple through the court. The captain's hand slid toward his blade. Kaelira lifted 2 fingers, and the room froze. "You do not kneel to your rulers?" she asked, voice even, the echo of 100 queens under it. "I kneel to what I believe," he said. "Not to what I fear." Soft, simple, no defiance in the tone, only a statement placed on the floor between them like a cup of water. He could have held her eyes to show strength, or dropped them to offer safety. He chose to meet her as if they were already in conversation, as if the crown on her head and the chains on his wrists were costumes their world had forced over them, and they were both waiting for an intermission where they could laugh. The ancestors hissed, "Foolishness is a veil. Let him crawl, or let him bleed." Kaelira's fingers tightened around the rail of her throne. She remembered a different whisper once, not from a crown, but from her mother's mouth. "Greatness is not loud, Kael. It is listening, when it would be easier to command." "The border clash," she said, and the court leaned in. "Tell me how you saw it." Elias's jaw worked once. The others glanced between him and the queen, terrified to speak, more terrified not to. He lifted his bound hands a little, the chain clinking softly. "I saw people pulled into a current they didn't make," he said. "Ours and yours. The current wanted a shape. Someone helped give it one." The court erupted. Lies, theatrics, human tricks. Kaelira let the noise wash around her. She studied the man who had refused the easy movements of fear. The crown throbbed, affronted. Blood, it breathed again, more insistent. "This is how it begins, with a softness. Stamp it out. Make an example." She should have ordered it. Her lips parted to give the old sentence the room wanted, and then he did. Something more outrageous than refusing to kneel. He smiled not at her power, not at his doom, but at a thought he had just had that he wished he could share with her. It was a small, rueful thing, a crescent of humor that had nothing to do with survival. It was so disarming that her own mouth almost answered before she could stop it. Doubt slid into her chest like a thin blade. She found herself imagining, against her will, how that mouth might move when it wasn't chapped, what those eyes might look like when they weren't bracing for consequence. She imagined, absurdly, that if she spoke to him without the crown, she would have to hold her breath to keep from laughing too soon, from telling him too much. The thought flushed her all the way to the ears. She tightened her grip on the rail until the crystal etched her palm. "Enough," a warlord barked. "Let us harvest confession and be done. This human stains your floor with insolence." Kaelira did not look away from Elias. If she did, she knew she would be the crown entirely again. "You will not touch him," she said, and the words landed. In the room like iron seat dot, a silence pooled, dense and startled. The warlord's nostrils flared. "My queen," I said. She repeated, "You will not touch him." She rose. The crown's heat spilled down the sides of her face like liquid light. It wanted her to shout. She refused. She walked down the steps one by one, feeling the old voices slither and coil, their counsel growing sharp. At the foot of the throne, she stopped an arm's length from Elias. The chain between his wrists tugged tight. He did not flinch. Up close, his eyes were a brown like old bark after rain, steady, curious, unbearably alive. "Elias Ward," she said, quieter now, so that Room had to lean forward to hear. You will speak to me again. Not here. The last words were for the crown as much as for the court. Not here, where every syllable she allowed herself became a weapon in someone else's hand. You will be kept. You will be fed. A hum of outrage. She ignored it. And you will tell me everything you saw. Slowly, carefully. The corner of his mouth dipped something like relief. Something like respect. Yes, Your Majesty, he said. The chains lifted with a gesture. Not removed. She would not give the court that open target but softened. The guards pulled him back. He never broke eye contact, and the simple faith of that connection made the crown sputter like a lamp starved of air. When the doors closed, behind him, the heat at her temples surged so fiercely she had to touch the rail to steady herself. Blood. The ancestors hissed, panicked now, angry in their panic. We know the shape of safety. Do not leave it. She stood in an island of quiet beneath a sun she could not put down. The city waited. The fleets waited. The warlords watched with naked calculations. Inside her, something loosened that had been clenched for years. Something else tightened that had never existed until a man in chains refused to kneel. The crown had chosen a path long before she was born. Yet when she closed her eyes, the path she saw was not a road of fire, but a pair of human eyes looking back at her without fear, inviting her gently, impossibly to step off the map. She opened her eyes, and for the first time in years did not immediately know what she would do next. The uncertainty felt like standing at the edge of a cliff over warm water. She felt the court's impatience prick her skin. She felt the ancestors pressing their old shapes against her mind, and beneath all of it, she felt the quiet aftershock of that gaze. As if a door somewhere had swung open, and a different kind of wind had found her. The palace corridors hummed with a silence that was not silence at all. It was the silence of whispers tucked into corners, of guards standing too stiffly, of ministers who looked away too quickly when her eyes brushed them. Queen Kaelira walked them with the crown still smoldering on her brow, though the heat had become a brand pressing against her skull. Every few steps, the ancestors stirred, muttering in tongues that made her temples ache. The human must break, they urged. Let him bleed truth under the blade. You feed weakness by sparing him. She did not answer them. Her lips were a straight line as she moved through archways lit by rivers of molten light. But inside, the words echoed louder than the torches. Her counsel already smelled hesitation. Hesitation was blood in the water. And yet every time she tried to imagine crushing the human named Elias Ward, the image blurred. His eyes replaced it. Steady, unflinching, not begging, not boasting, only meeting. When she entered the private council chamber, the voices outside dimmed, but suspicion sat heavy in the air. The warlords were there, cloaked in bone-white armor. Ministers stood like statues, their quills poised to scratch out history, with one line. Your Majesty, one warlord began, the fleets grow restless. The people demand retaliation. We must not look weak. The prisoners must be made an example. Kaelira studied him, her gaze as sharp as the blade at his hip. The fleets grow restless because you whisper into their ears at night. You speak of blood to men who already dream of conquest. He stiffened. The room rippled with unease. Accusing a warlord was like throwing a torch into a dry field. Another minister cleared her throat. The crown chose war, Queen. It has never been wrong. To deny its judgment is to deny the empire itself. The whispers in her head rose in agreement, a storm of voices hissing approval of the minister's words. Kaelira pressed her nails into her palm until they left crescents. The crown is not the empire, she said softly, but no less dangerously. The people are. The chamber froze. She could feel their stares cutting into her skin. A line had been crossed, and she had drawn it herself. Before anyone could challenge her further, a guard entered, bowing low. The human asks to speak. He claims he has knowledge of the border clash. The council erupted in protest. but kaelira raised a single hand. Bring him. The doors opened, and Elias Ward was led in, his chains lighter now, though still visible. His steps were measured, his shoulders straight. He looked at her first, not the council, as though the entire galaxy narrowed to the space between their eyes. You said you would tell me everything you saw, she reminded him. Elias nodded. And I will, but not for them. His gaze flicked toward the ministers. For you, the warlords growled. One slammed his gauntlet on the table. Insolence. Queen, allow us. Silence. Kaelira cut in, her tone a blade of ice. The whispers of the crown snarled at her rebellion. She ignored them. She gestured for Elias to continue. Your Majesty, he said, his voice steady though he must have known his life hung on each word. The clash at the border wasn't a mistake. It wasn't an accident of fear or miscommunication. It was lit like a fire set in dry grass. Someone on both sides wanted it. Gasps and shouts filled the chamber. A minister hissed, lies. But Kaelira's heart clenched. She had wondered the same thing in private, though she had buried it beneath the crown's demands. Elias went on, his eyes never leaving hers. Ships that weren't meant to be there appeared. Weapons fired from positions no soldier could reach, without being placed there in advance. Both our people bled because someone wanted profit, or power, or both. The crown thundered in her skull. Weakness, 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 do not listen. Burn him from your sight. Yet she leaned forward, the firelight painting her face in molten gold. If you speak truth, she said slowly, then you accuse my warlords of treachery. A dangerous silence fell. The warlords stiffened, hands twitching at blades. Elias did not flinch. If the shoe fits, wear it. One warlord exploded in rage, drawing his weapon half from its sheath. The chamber roared. In an instant Kaelira stood, her cloak swirling like wings. Draw against him, and you draw against me. The hall dropped into stunned silence. The warlord froze, then shoved his blade back into its sheath with a snarl. Kaelira turned her gaze back to Elias, her voice low enough for only him to hear. You walk on the edge of a blade sharper than you know. Why risk it? He tilted his head, and there it was, again that small, rueful smile. Because if no one risks truth, war wins before the first shot is fired. For the first time in years, the weight of the crown felt less like fire and more like chains. She hated the feeling, hated how it tangled with something warmer she couldn't name. She dismissed the council abruptly, ignoring their protests. As the chamber emptied, she caught Elias's gaze one last time. His eyes said what his mouth could not. This was only the beginning, and she knew, with a chill that wrapped her bones, that he was right. The night fell heavy over the palace. A sky of molten indigo split, with silver streaks from patrolling ships. The Empire did not sleep, not when war buzzed in its bones. And yet, Queen Kaelira stood alone on the highest balcony, the crown of flames cooling against her brow as if waiting for her to speak again. Below, the city shimmered like a living ocean, restless with rumors. Whispers traveled faster than light. Their queen had spared a human dot, the ancestors muttered in her mind. Sharper tonight. You endanger everything. Tradition is iron because hearts are water. Do not let his words drip into you. But their voices were fraying at the edges, as though even they feared what her hesitation meant. A sound stirred behind her boots striking. Marble. The guards had brought Elias Ward, as she had secretly ordered. His chains were lighter now, though still binding his wrists. When the guards left, the balcony grew enormous and hollow. Only two figures remained beneath the jeweled sky, a queen and her prisoner. You asked for me, Elias said, not bowing, not whispering, only standing with his hands bound and his eyes unflinching. The council is sharpening knives, Kaelira answered. They claim you speak lies meant to poison me. I want to hear more of these lies, if lies they are. His mouth curved, a small shadow of humor. Truth has a way of sounding like poison to those who feed on fear. She hated the way her lips nearly softened at that. Hated how the crown hissed at her weakness. She turned, cloak brushing the stones, and gestured for him to walk with her along the balcony's edge. As they walked, Elias spoke in fragments about how the ships at the border were already armed before the supposed provocation, about how human traders whispered of secret deals with alien merchants whose coins bore the Empire's crest, about how the dead had been used like fuel for speeches on both sides. Each word tightened something in her chest. "If this is true," she murmured, "then my warlords lit the fire themselves." "Not just yours," he said, "ours too. War fattens the few. Everyone else becomes kindling." The silence after that was dangerous. Below, a single horn echoed across the city, signaling the midnight change of guards. Above, the stars blinked like indifferent judges. Kaelira's fingers twitched at her side. For the first time, she wanted to rip the crown off and hurl it into the night, but it clung. It always clung. She stopped walking, turning to him. "Tell me why you keep looking at me, as if I am not the one holding your life between my fingers." He studied her in the quiet, his eyes not angry, not pleading, curious. "Because if you wanted me dead," he said finally, "I already would be. You're not half as cruel as you want them to believe." Her breath caught. No one had ever dared say such a thing to her, not even her mother, in private. It was as if he had reached past the crown and touched the girl who still lingered beneath it. A guard's shout suddenly split the night. Torches flared beyond the balcony gates. In seconds, assassins in cloaks of black fire stormed in, eyes burning with the zeal of warlords who feared her hesitation more than enemy fleets. Blades gleamed, aimed not at Elias but at her. She moved before thought. Her staff flashed, intercepting the first strike. Elias lunged too, chains clashing against steel, as he knocked a blade aside with nothing but his bound wrists. Together they fought, her fire and his raw defiance colliding in desperate rhythm. One assassin fell to her power. Another stumbled when Elias drove his shoulder into his chest. When it was over, 4 bodies lay sprawled across marble. The torches hissed in the sudden stillness. Kaelira's chest heaved, her staff still glowing. Elias leaned against the rail, blood trickling from a shallow cut along his arm. She turned on him, fire still alive in her veins. "You could have let them kill me. The chains gave you excuse, yet you fought for me. I don't like watching cowards take the easy kill," he said, wincing, but then his eyes found hers again. "And I don't want war. Not between your people and mine. Not if I can stop it." Her hands trembled, not from the fight, but from the ache behind her ribs. She stepped closer, closer than a queen should. The crown hissed in protest. She ignored it. She lifted a hand, almost against her will, brushing the blood from his arm with her thumb. His breath hitched. The chains between his wrists rattled softly, and for an unbearable moment, the air between them pulsed like something alive. "You are dangerous, Elias Ward," she whispered. "So are you," he answered, his voice low, rough, almost tender. For a heartbeat, the world shrank to nothing but his eyes, steady and unafraid, and the fire inside her chest that did not come from the crown. But before either could say more, horns blared again, this time urgent. The council was coming, summoned by the sound of blood spilled in the queen's own chamber. Kaelira straightened instantly, shoving the softness back behind her face of stone. She gestured sharply, and guards swept in to seize Elias again. As they dragged him away, his eyes clung to hers one last time, not pleading, promising, and Kaelira realized with a shock that rattled her bones. The crown was not the only thing binding her now. The council chamber reeked of iron and smoke the next morning. Torches spat light across the walls carved with victories of past ruler stone, reminders that hesitation had no place on the throne. Queen Kaelira sat at the head of the table, her cloak falling in heavy folds, the crown of flames glowing faintly against her temples. The court's faces ringed her like predators circling prey. Reports of the midnight attack had spread like wildfire. Whispers curled through the empire. Assassins had entered the queen's chambers. Some said it was a human ploy. Others murmured it was a test of her strength. Only kaelira knew the truth. The knives had been forged in her own house, wielded by hands sworn to her protection. "You endanger us all," spat Lord Threx, his armor gleaming with gold filigree. "You'll let a human stand beside you, and suddenly shadows creep through our halls. Coincidence? I think not." "Be careful," Threx kaelira replied, her tone a blade wrapped in silk. "Your words walk close to treason." But the crown pulsed at her temples, the ancestors urging. "He speaks for war. War keeps the empire sharp. War honors us." She silenced them with a thought, though the effort drew a tremor to her hand. It was then Elias was brought in again, chains clinking softly. He bore the cut on his arm like it was nothing, his chin unbowed. The council erupted in shouts. "Kill him, flay him, break him." Kaelira lifted her hand, and the chamber stilled. "You saved your queen," she said to Elias, the words loud enough for every ear. "Tell us why." Elias's voice carried, steady as iron. "Because your death would light the war they want, and because truth dies fastest when its last witness falls." A hush rippled. His eyes never left hers. Something in that gaze steadied her more than the crown's fire ever had. But then he did what none expected. "I can prove the warlord's guilty." The council erupted again, outrage and fear in equal measure. Threx slammed his gauntlet to the table. "Lies. He seeks to fracture us." Kaelira's heart slammed in her chest. "Prove it," she demanded. Elias nodded. "Your Majesty, hidden in the armories of the southern docks, there are crates, human weapons, traded for your empire's rare crystals. The clash at the border was not chance. It was engineered. Your own generals have been selling both sides the matchsticks." The words were poison in the chamber. Warlords growled. Ministers paled. The crown roared in her mind. "Crush him. Silence him before the people hear." She stood. "If he lies, the truth will show. If he speaks true, then our war is not against humans, but against rot in our own house." Gasps echoed. Never had a queen spoken such words. That night, unable to trust even her council, Kaelira disguised herself in a hood of shadow steel and led a small retinue to the southern docks. The city breathed around them, streets thick with rumors, citizens glancing at their queen in secret awe and fear. Elias walked beside her, chains hidden beneath a cloak. The docks loomed, cavernous vaults of stone and steel, where ships whispered like sleeping beasts. They crept into the armories. Torchlight flickered over stacked crates sealed with both human and valorian markings. Kaelira's breath caught. Elias had spoken truth. Suddenly, shadows detached from the walls again, cloaked in silence. Warlords' men. Steel sang kaelira, single quotes as guards clashed with them, but the ambush was too many. She whirled, staff blazing fire, striking one down. Elias fought with nothing but his chains, wrapping them around a throat, wrenching a blade free, turning his bonds into weapons. The sight seared hers body, moving with reckless grace, every strike for her, not himself. Amid the chaos, a torch fell, licking fire across the crates. One shattered open. Human rifles spilled onto the floor, gleaming proof in the flames. For a heartbeat, even the assassins faltered. "Treachery," Kaelira whispered, rage thundering in her chest. Elias grabbed her arm, pulling her clear of a falling beam. Their faces were close, breath ragged, firelight painting them in desperate gold. For an instant, the world shrank to just the two of them, his hand on her, her heart roaring louder than the crown's voices. But there was no time. She ripped free, summoned fire, and blasted the assassins back long enough for her guards to seize the crates as evidence. When the battle smoke cleared, Kaelira stood in the ruins of her own empire's lies. Proof burned at her feet. Elias, still bound, met her gaze, as if daring her to deny what she now knew. For the first time, she did not feel the crown's whispers as command. She felt them as chains. "The truth will come to light," she said, though her voice trembled, and deep inside, beneath fire and fury, a forbidden thought took root that this human, bound and beaten, had given her something her crown never had: a choice. The throne room had never felt so sharp, every column like a spear aimed at Queen Kaelira's heart. Banners of victory drooped heavily, but tonight they seemed more like veils hiding the eyes of traitors. The proof from the dock's grates of human weapons, gleaming with valorian seals, lay stacked before the court. The truth was no longer rumor. It was visible, undeniable, burning in the sight of every warlord and minister. Kaelira sat upon the high seat, the crown of flames restless against her brow. The whispers inside her skull had grown frantic, no longer calm advisors, but furious ghosts. Silence the truth. Silence the human. War is the only shield. War is the only song. She ignored them. Her hands gripped the arms of her throne until her knuckles whitened. The court was a storm waiting to break. Lord Threx stepped forward, eyes blazing. "This is fabrication, enemy trickery. The queen has been deceived by the prisoner she foolishly spared." His gaze sliced toward Elias, who stood in chains at the center of the hall, bruised but unbowed. "Allow me to cut his throat here and now, and the Empire will remember your strength." Kaelira's voice rang like tempered steel. "No blade will touch him, not while I rule." A roar of outrage surged through the chamber. Warlords slammed fists on the table. Ministers cried of dishonor. Guards glanced uneasily between oaths and orders. "You dare protect him?" Threx spat. "A human who soils our floor with lies." Elias's voice cut through the chaos, steady, clear. "They're not lies. You all know it. You've bled profit from both sides and fed your people. The story of justice. I've seen it before in my world, and others. War is a business, and you are merchants." The words fell like blades. Silence followed, thick as smoke, and then came the crack of steel. Warlords drawing their weapons. Their loyalty to themselves louder than their loyalty to their queen. Kaelira rose. Her staff ignited, fire spilling from its tip like a second sun. "To raise your blades in my throne is to declare yourselves traitors." They did not lower them. The chamber erupted into violence. Warlords lunged, assassins hidden in plain sight, unsheathing daggers. Ministers scattered like startled birds. Kaelira's loyal guards clashed steel against steel, screams echoing beneath the vaulted ceiling. She moved like flame incarnate, her staff cutting arcs of fire through the storm. One warlord fell with his armor melting across his chest. Another stumbled back as her power split the marble beneath his feet. Elias fought beside her, chains wrapped around his fists like iron serpents. He wrenched a sword from a guard, his movements raw, desperate, but effective. Together they carved a circle of survival in the chaos, her fire and his iron. Two forces never meant to meet, yet perfectly matched. A blade caught her cloak, tearing it wide. Another strike nearly split her crown. Elias shoved her aside, taking the brunt of the blow on his arm. Blood darkened his sleeve, but he did not falter. Their eyes met across the roar of battle. For a heartbeat, time bent. He smiled faintly. Even bleeding, even chained. She felt something inside her split, duty and desire colliding. The whispers of the crown drowning under the thunder of her own heart. The surviving warlords fell back, snarling, dragging their wounded with them. The hall lay in ruin, bodies scattered, banners scorched. Kaelira stood tall in the wreckage, staff blazing, cloak in tatters. At her side, Elias swayed but refused to fall, his sword still clutched in his chained hands. The council chamber had become a graveyard of certainty. Never before had the Empire seen its queen stand openly beside a human. Never before had traitors been revealed, not by whispers, but by fire and proof. Ira single quotes as voice carried over the silence that followed. Let it be known, she declared, that our enemy is not humanity. Our enemy is corruption, within our own blood. Those who sold us to war will answer for it. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the survivors. The warlords who fled would not stay silent, they would gather, plot, strike again. But the seed of truth had been planted, and no crown, no whisper, could root it out now. As the guards moved to seize the traitors' corpses, Kaelira turned to Elias. He was pale, blood streaking his arm, but his eyes still burned. She stepped closer, lifting his chin with her fingers. The court froze, stunned. You risked your life for mine again, she said softly. His voice was hoarse but certain. Someone had to. The crown seared her temples, furious, shrieking for obedience. But all she could hear was the thrum of her own heart and the truth in his gaze. Then hear me, she whispered, low enough only he could catch. As long as I breathe, you will not kneel. For the first time in centuries, the throne of Valoris held not just a queen, but a choice. Dawn rose over the empire like a blade. The city below the palace shimmered in red-gold light, but it was not peace that warmed the horizon, it was fire, waiting to spread. Warlords who had fled the throne room now rallied entire fleets to their banners. Whispers of rebellion clung to every market stall, every soldier's barracks, every hushed chamber. The empire was a tinderbox, and Queen Kaelira stood at the heart of it, the crown of flames burning against her skull like a second sun. The council chamber was rebuilt overnight, banners replaced, marble polished, but no amount of order could erase the cracks that had spread through the court. Kaelira stood at the throne, staff in hand, while her loyal guards formed a ring of steel. Across the floor, prisoners knelt, the surviving traitor warlords she had captured in the chaos. Their eyes burned, not with shame, but with defiance. The crown whispered louder than ever, the voices of her ancestors demanding in unison, finish this. Blood proves strength. Execute them before the court. Then burn the fleets that refused to kneel. Her temples throbbed. She wanted silence, wanted to rip the crown free, but to do so before the entire empire would be to fracture her rule beyond repair. At her side stood Elias Ward, no longer shackled, his wounds bound but still visible, his face pale with exhaustion. His presence drew silent outrage from ministers who had never seen a human stand beside their queen without chains. Yet, Kaelira allowed it, needing his steadiness, like Lord Threx, one of the captured warlords, sneered up at her. You cannot deny the crown's will, Kaelira. Every ancestor in your blood demands war. Do you think a single human's lies can drown the voices of centuries? The crown pulsed in triumph at his words, as if reminding her she was its vessel, not its master. Her fingers tightened on the staff. Before she could answer, Elias stepped forward. His voice carried calm, yet firm. A crown that feeds on war is not strength. It's fear wearing metal. Gasps erupted. To speak in the Queen's Hall was audacity. To question the crown itself was heresy. But Elias's eyes never left hers. You told me once, he continued, that the empire is the people, not the relic. What do they need now? She's of another. War, or a queen who can break the cycle? The crown roared in her head, furious, 1,000 voices clawing to silence him. Kill him. Silence this worm before he poisons you further. War is the marrow of rule. But Kaelira felt something shift, like a crack running through stone. Beneath the thunder of the crown's whispers was another sound, her own heartbeat, quickened not by duty, but by the steady fire in Elias's gaze. The ministers cried out, demanding his execution for heresy. The warlords laughed bitterly, certain the crown would consume her if she dared deny it. Kaelira rose to her full height, the crown blazing like molten fire. If the crown commands blood, she said, her voice cutting through the uproar, then let it judge me first. The chamber froze. The fire within the crown surged, searing her temples, pouring agony down her spine. Her vision blurred as the whispers screamed, "Obey or burn. Obey or end." Her knees buckled, but before she fell, Elias was there, catching her. His arms steadied her, even as her body trembled under the crown's fury. His voice was low, but firm at her ear. "You don't need it. You never did. The strength isn't in them, it's in you." She gasped, breath ragged, the crown's fire clawing at her skull. The warlords shouted, the ministers wailed, the court dissolved into chaos, but all she could see were his eyes, steady, unafraid, anchoring her against the storm. "Look at me, Kaelira," he urged. "Not them, not it, me." Her gaze locked on his. In that instant, something ancient cracked. The crown's flames faltered, its whisper sputtering like a dying fire, with a cry torn from the depths of her chest. She tore the crown from her head and hurled it to the marble floor. It struck with a sound like shattering thunder. Fire spilled, screaming voices shrieked into the air and then silence. The court reeled in shock. Ministers staggered back. Warlords' eyes widened in terror. The crown of flames, worn by generations, lay cracked and lifeless at her feet. Kaelira stood straighter, the pain fading, replaced by clarity. "The crown chose war," she declared, her voice ringing through the hall. "But I choose truth. I choose my people. I choose peace." Every word burned through centuries of tradition. She knew half the empire would see her as blasphemy incarnate, but the other half, those who had grown tired of endless blood, would see her as hope. Elias still held her arm, steadying her. His presence was no longer that of a prisoner. It was something else, equal, undeniable. Their eyes met, and for a heartbeat, neither the court nor the ruins of the crown existed. The ministers erupted into cries, torn between worship and outrage. The warlords spat oaths of rebellion, but Kaelira did not falter. She raised her staff, its flame now her own, unbound by relic or whispers. "Let the empire hear me," she said. "The crown is broken. I am your queen, and war will not be our master." Elias's hand brushed hers, hidden in the folds of her cloak. A silent vow of alliance and something more dangerous, more tender, that neither dared name yet. Outside, the horns of rebellion began to sound. The storm was coming, but for the first time Kaelira faced it not with a crown of fire, but with a heart that had chosen for itself. The city square overflowed with voices as rebel fleets darkened the sky. Weapons glowed above, ready to turn the palace into ash. Queen Kaelira stood on the balcony, the broken crown lying in ruins behind her. Her staff burned in her hand, but it was not the relic's fire anymore, it was her own. Beside her stood Elias Ward, no longer a prisoner, but her anchor. For centuries the crown chose war. She cried to the masses, "But tonight, I choose you." The people roared, unarmed yet unyielding. Their defiance rose like thunder, shaking the air. The rebel warlords commanded their ships to fire, but hesitation spread. Soldiers stared down at the civilians, at the queen who stood among them instead of above. One ship broke away, then another, until only Lord Threx's flagship remained, its cannons lit with fatal fire. Kaelira braced Elias's hand, finding hers. But before the blast came, a loyal vessel fired first, shattering Threx's ship into flames. Rebellion ended not with slaughter, but with refusal. The square erupted in cheers. Kaelira turned to Elias, her voice trembling yet certain. "My crown chose war," she whispered, tightening her grip on his hand. "But my eyes chose you." Scholars would later reveal the crown had been no gift at all, but a parasite feeding on fear for centuries. By breaking it, Kaelira freed not just herself, but the empire, and as dawn rose, she stood with Elias at her side, queen at last, by her own choice, not by chains.